Never run, never scream. I first noticed something different in Owen when the heat broke and the evenings cooled enough to leave the windows open. There hadn't been an incident, no fever, no fall, nothing to blame. Just a sudden and unshakable quiet that didn't belong to a 6-year-old boy. He spent more and more time near the edge of the yard, standing where the grass ended and the trees began. His arms hung loosely at his sides, and he stared straight ahead. His posture wasn't rigid, but there was an intentional stillness to it, like he was trying to imitate something. When I asked what he was looking at, he'd say, "Nothing." But it never felt like nothing. Not when he subtly shifted his stance as I approached. Not when his eyes flicked back toward the trees, as if waiting for them to move before he did. One afternoon, I stood behind the sliding door, watching him through the screen. He hadn't moved from where he'd been the day before. His chin was slightly raised, his lips moving as if he were speaking, but no sound reached me. I called his name twice, but he didn't react. Only when I stepped out onto the deck and called again did he finally turn. His expression was calm, maybe even a little curious, as though he wasn't sure why I was there or what I wanted. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. "No one," he replied. "Did someone come by?" He shook his head and glanced back toward the trees. "He's not someone," he said. The next day I came home from work to find him crouched in the same spot. He was tracing something, in the dirt, whispering too softly for me to understand. As I approached, he stood up and brushed his hands on his shorts. "What were you doing out here?" I asked. He turned toward the trees. "Just listening," he said. "To what?" "He doesn't like to talk," Owen replied. After a beat, he added, "You shouldn't run from him. He sees better when you move fast. There's a particular kind of stillness that settles into your body when something from your own childhood, the kind of thing you spent years convincing yourself never happened, comes back in someone else's voice. That phrase, the warning. I had heard it before. That night after Owen had gone to bed, I took a flashlight out to the edge of the yard. I didn't go far, just past the fence, far, enough for the scent of the soil to shift and for the air to grow damp in a way it hadn't been just a few steps back. The insect sounded different there. The usual rhythm was off, less like buzzing and more like something faintly electronic but not quite artificial. I kept the flashlight beam low, sweeping the base of the trees carefully. About 5 feet in, I stopped. There was nothing to see. But the air felt charged. Still, it pressed in close without touching me. A prickling sensation ran across the back of my neck, as if something had turned toward me. I remembered the first time I'd felt that. Decades earlier, during a summer trip to Arizona, I'd been 10, exploring a trail on Camelback Mountain. It was hot that year, the kind of heat that lingered through September. I'd paused near the base of a sandstone outcrop, standing just outside the shade of a formation that always seemed to hold the same dim light no matter the hour. That was the summer my grandmother warned me not to run or scream, not past the saguaro line. At the time, it hadn't made any sense. Now, it made far too much. In the summer of 1996, my parents put me on a plane with a tag looped through my belt and a manila envelope tucked under my arm. Inside were my medical records, emergency contacts, and a handwritten note from my mother that read, "Josh likes peanut butter, hates peas, bedtime at 9. I remember the flight attendant assigned to watch me. She wore too much perfume, vanilla, and smoke, and her nails were bright red. I spent the descent staring at her shoes, trying not to look out the window. The desert stretching below made my stomach tighten. The sky was too wide. It had corners I didn't understand. Grandma B met me at Sky Harbor Airport, standing beneath a faded arrival sign. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat and held a dented thermos. She gave me one firm hug, kissed my forehead, and handed me a pair of sunglasses far too large for my face. "Don't squint," she said. "You'll age like a raisin." Her house sat just off a winding dirt road lined with broken fencing and Palo Verde trees. The mountains in the distance hunched like sleeping giants. The air outside was dry and unnervingly still for late morning. Her front door was a sun-bleached turquoise, and the screen creaked when she opened it. There was no central air inside, only ceiling fans that rotated slowly and hummed with the sound of tired metal. What I noticed first wasn't the heat or the quiet, but the dog waiting in the hallway. She was tawny and long-legged, with pointed ears and a narrow face that reminded me of a fox. Her tail stood out behind her like a stiff brush, and her eyes never left mine. "That's Lucy," Grandma said, hanging her hat on a hook beside the door. "She's a mutt. Smart, but thinks too much." Lucy didn't bark, she didn't sniff. She just watched. "She'll sleep by your door at night," Grandma added as she moved toward the kitchen. "Don't worry, she knows what she's doing." That evening, after dinner, grilled cheese with tomato slices on the side, we sat outside while the sky shifted into streaks of purple and salmon. The sun didn't so much set as slowly disappear behind the mountain, lowering itself inch by inch as though reluctant to leave. Grandma lit a citronella candle and took a sip from her thermos. I had realized by then it no longer held lemonade. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You're not city soft, are you?" "I don't think so." "Well, good. You'll be fine then." She set her thermos down and stared out toward the horizon, where a line of saguaros stood perfectly still. "You can roam a bit if you want, just stay within sight of the house and mind the wash. Rattlers hole up in there when the sun's high." I nodded. "One more thing," she said, brushing something from her knee. "This was something your grandfather told me back when we moved out here. He was Army, saw things he wouldn't name, and not much ever rattled him. But out here, past the saguaro line..." She paused. I waited. "He always said, never run, never scream. You understand?" I blinked, unsure if she was serious or trying to spook me. "Just don't do it," she said. "If you see something, stay calm. Walk home slowly with your eyes ahead, and if it follows..." She stopped there. Her hand went to her drink, and the rest of the sentence was lost to the clink of ice. The next morning I woke to find Lucy waiting at the end of the hallway. Her tail hung low and her ears pointed straight ahead. When I entered the kitchen, she followed close behind. She didn't sniff or nudge. She moved beside me like we had done this routine for years. After breakfast, I asked if I could go exploring. Grandma handed me a canteen and a wide-brimmed hat. "Remember what I said?" she told me. "No running, no yelling, and if it feels wrong, turn around." The backyard opened into desert. The fence had long since collapsed and been overtaken by mesquite and cholla. I followed a game trail past the tool shed and a chicken coop that hadn't seen chickens in years. The path dipped across a shallow wash where the sand turned reddish and the air smelled faintly of copper. Lucy walked beside me until we reached the first ridge. That's where she stopped. I turned around and called for her. She sat down in the dirt, panting gently, but didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon. "Come on," I said, patting my leg. "It's not far." She didn't follow. "You're really not coming?" She didn't budge. So I kept going. The farther I walked, the more the landscape changed. The brush grew sparse, the ground harder. The sun pressed relentlessly against my back and the breeze shifted in tone. It wasn't a whistle or a rustle, but a dry buzzing sound, like air forced through cracked teeth. I came across what looked like an old foundation, half buried in sand. Near it was a ring of stones, possibly the remnants of a fire pit. A nearby outcrop bore shallow carvings along its inner face. They weren't letters I recognized, just shapes and loops, some resembling open mouths or twisted symbols. I crouched to get a better look, and behind me, gravel shifted. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. I took a cautious step backward, toward the path. Then I saw it. At the edge of the rocks, beyond the juniper scrub, a shape stood among the brush. It was tall, not quite a person, but too structured to be a tree. It didn't sway or lean. It didn't react to the gusts that passed around it. It was simply there. My mouth went dry. I blinked, and it was gone. My grandmother's warning fresh in my mind, I turned and began walking back toward the ridge, avoiding any sort of stride that could even remotely be considered a run. When the house finally came into view, Lucy was exactly where I had left her. Her tail no longer moved. Her head was high, nose twitching. She didn't bark or run to greet. Fursier. She waited until I passed her, then fell in beside me, silent and steady, as if she understood exactly what I had seen. The quiet changed first. In the weeks after I walked past the ridge, the desert stopped sounding the way I remembered. There had always been a certain rhythm to its silence, something built from the quiet friction of life. Cicadas ticking in, the brush, the scratch of birds shifting in the dust, the distant rasp of wind as it struggled across stone. Now that subtle chorus had gone missing. The places that had once whispered with movement felt drained, and in the absence of sound I began to notice footsteps. They were never loud, just the faint crunch of sand or the brittle snap of twigs behind me. The sound would vanish the moment I turned, retreating into stillness as if it had never existed. At first I thought it might be Lucy keeping her distance, but she had not crossed the ridge since that first day, and I never saw her leave the house when I did. I began walking the trail with my shoulders braced and my head forward, forcing myself not to look behind me. But I always listened. I didn't tell Grandma. She had already warned me once, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she'd say if I admitted I had ignored her. Late in July, I stayed out longer than I should have. The sky had begun shifting to deep orange and violet by the time I realized how far I had wandered. I had followed the edge of the wash down past a row of shale ridges that didn't look familiar. The air had cooled quickly with the sunset, and the breeze cut against my skin in dry, sharp bursts. As I climbed back up the embankment, I heard it again. Footsteps, just a few behind mine, close enough to register but not close enough to place. I froze, and the sound stopped instantly. I stood motionless, flashlight still unlit in my hand, fingers tightening against the metal. My skin prickled with the sense that something nearby wasn't just watching, but observing, studying me. Didn't run. I remembered what Grandma had said. I walked back, each step deliberate, holding my breath until I saw the porch light appear through the brush. Grandma was waiting for me. She stood just outside the front door, arms crossed, lips pressed together, in a tight, unreadable line. The screen behind her was closed and locked. Lucy sat at her feet, ears pinned flat against her head. "You were out past sundown," she said. "I lost track of time. Don't do it again." Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried the same weight as the desert beyond her fence. She reached back, shut the front door, and turned the deadbolt, once, then twice. She didn't ask if I'd seen anything. I didn't offer an explanation. After that night, she began locking every window before dusk, and kept the porch light on until morning. I started sleeping with the sheet pulled up to my chin even when the night stayed warm. A few days later, the nightmare came. In the dream, I woke to a soft tapping against my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was a branch or maybe a moth, but the sound came with intention. 3 taps, evenly spaced. Then silence. I rose from bed and stepped toward the window. Outside, crouched just beneath the sill, was a figure. It wasn't pressed to the glass. It didn't peer in or press its face close. It simply knelt, its spine arched unnaturally, one shoulder raised higher than the other. Its head tilted at an angle that didn't seem natural, not aggressive or curious, but analytical, as if I were a shape it couldn't quite define. Its mouth was stretched wide, impossibly so, but completely still. No breath, no sound, just that open mouth, waiting. I woke with sweat across my chest and the sheet tangled. Around my legs, the window was closed and locked. But when I leaned in, I saw 3 smudges on the glass. They were the length of fingers, spaced evenly apart. I didn't sleep again until the sun rose. The last day I spent alone in the wash was the day I broke the rule. It was just past noon. The air shimmered with heat, and the rocks blurred at the edges. I had packed a peanut butter sandwich and a can of ginger ale in my backpack, and was sitting beneath a stub-limbed mesquite tree at the base of the ridge, watching dust swirl across the shallow wash. Lucy had followed me part of the way that morning, stopping again at the same familiar point where the incline shifted. I could still see her from where I sat, her figure still as a post at the crest of the slope. By then, I had convinced myself the footsteps were tricks of the ear, echoes, animals, nerves. I had grown too used to the quiet. Then I heard it again. This time it didn't come from behind me. It came from somewhere off to the left, deeper in the wash. The sound was heavier than before, slower. It dragged across the ground with weight. Stood, feeling the hairs on my arms rise. I scanned the brush slowly, trying not to move too quickly or sharply. Then, between two boulders, a tall, ill-proportioned figure stepped into view. Its limbs were too long and its posture didn't resemble that of anything I recognized. I couldn't see its face. I wasn't sure it even had one. It didn't lunge, hiss, or advance at all. It simply was, and that was worse. My body moved before I could stop it. I ran. I barely made it 10 feet before something hit me hard from the side. I hit the ground, elbow scraping rock, and let out a startled yell. It wasn't the creature. It was Lucy. She stood over me, growling low, her body rigid and braced against mine. I started to rise, but she snapped her head toward the rocks and let out a single bark, sharp and warning. I froze. At the edge of the path, something moved. It wasn't enough to be certain, just a twitch at the periphery, just enough to make me question what I had seen before, but nothing stepped forward. Lucy remained between me and that part of the wash for the entire walk home. She never looked away. She didn't leave my side once. That night, Grandma sat me down in the kitchen. She didn't scold me or ask questions. She poured herself a drink and stared out the window above the sink. "You ran, didn't you?" I nodded. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't sigh. She didn't even seem surprised. After a moment, she said, "He knows you now." Then she turned away, and that was the end of it. I stayed inside for the next 3 days. I didn't speak much, and I didn't stray far from the windows. Lucy wouldn't leave the back door. She lay curled on the mat with her chin resting on her paws, ears twitching at every floorboard creak or shift in the wind outside. Grandma didn't ask questions. She moved more quietly than usual, watching me out of the corners of her eyes like I was someone else's child she'd agreed to watch for a while. She started leaving the radio on during dinner. It played old country songs from the 60s, fuzzy, warbling tunes that filled the silence without demanding attention. She also began pouring her drinks earlier in the evening. Once, I caught her standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the base of the hills. Her hands gripped the sink's edge and her lips moved silently, as if she were reciting something she wasn't sure she remembered correctly. On the fourth morning, something shifted. The stillness that had taken root inside the house, the tension in the walls, the quiet pacing of Lucy's feet on the tile, eased slightly. Not completely, but enough that I noticed. A breeze came in from the north, steady and dry, carrying a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. Insects. Faint at first. Barely. More than a whisper, but it was life returning, testing the edges of the quiet. Even Grandma seemed to sense the change. She opened the front door and swept for the first time in days. For the first time since I saw the figure, I began to think I might be able to step outside again. I told myself I would only go as far as the ridge. I would stay within sight of the house and return before noon. I wasn't planning to test anything. I only wanted to see that the desert still belonged to itself. Grandma had fallen asleep in her chair when I slipped out. Lucy tried to follow, but I stepped out quickly and shut the screen door before she could push past. I didn't want her getting hurt again because of me. The path beyond the house looked unchanged. The same dusty trail, the same collapsed fence, the same red brush curling around the edges of the dry wash. But something about the space felt subtly off. The light seemed too bright, and the shadows cast by the saguaros didn't quite settle where they should have. There was a looseness to the landscape, as if its outlines had been sketched instead of drawn. I walked the ridge with measured steps, dragging my shoes through the gravel just enough to hear the sound they made. I listened carefully, scanning the familiar terrain for anything out of place. Nothing moved. The trail ahead remained still. I passed the spot where Lucy had tackled me. Her prints were still visible in the dirt, softened by time but still distinct. I should have turned back, but I didn't. It wasn't curiosity that carried me forward. It wasn't defiance either. It felt more like gravity, like the pull you feel when staring too long into deep water. You don't want to step in, but something in you wonders how long you could hold your breath. The arch, sitting recessed into a crumbling sandstone ridge, wasn't visible until I was nearly on top of it. Its curve was imperfect, jagged in places, as if something enormous had once forced its way through and left the wound behind. The temperature dropped as I stepped beneath it. Not enough to chill me, but enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. The air carried a wrongness that I couldn't define. It didn't smell like rot or blood or ozone. It didn't resemble anything I could name. It was simply unfamiliar, an alien, scent that didn't belong to wind or stone or life. I turned, suddenly certain I wasn't alone. That was when I screamed. The sound tore out of me before I could think to stop it, a high, involuntary snap of panic that split the air like a crack in glass, and the world responded. Everything around me changed at once. The wind paused. The light froze. The colors drained slightly from the sky. It was like something aware had taken notice and paused the moment to listen more closely, as if every particle around me had turned its attention to a single point. Then it appeared. I didn't see it emerge. It was simply there. Gaunt. Imposing. Taller than any person I'd ever seen. Its limbs were too long, its torso too thin. Its frame shaped like it had been built to slip between things rather than move through them. Its arms hung nearly to its knees. Its fingers stretched far beyond human proportion. Its face, or what passed for one, lacked any identifiable features except for the two black hollows where its eyes should have been. Those weren't sockets. They were voids, tunnels cut through the illusion of shape and memory and flesh. Looking into them was like glimpsing the bottom of something without end. They didn't reflect light. They absorbed it, and they were looking back. I couldn't move. My lungs pulled air, but the motion felt wrong. Mechanical, unsatisfying, like breathing in the memory of oxygen without the substance. The creature didn't speak. It didn't reach toward me or threaten in any way. It tilted its head slightly, as if it were trying to understand what I was. The angle matched what I'd seen in the dream, detached, analytical. Then from my left, something collided with it. Lucy. She hit it mid-stride, fur bristling, teeth bared. Her body passed into it, not against it, as if the creature weren't. Solid, more suggestion than structure. There was no sound of impact, no struggle. She disappeared into its form, and the figure flickered, not as if injured, but as if interrupted. Its outline warped, the way a reflection bends across rippling water. I stumbled backward. My heel struck the edge of the arch behind me, and the moment shattered. The weight in the air lifted. The light returned to its proper shade. Insects began to hum again in the distance. Wind moved the brush and everything resumed. I turned and ran, and didn't stop until I reached the porch. My legs went out from under me as I hit the steps, and I pressed my back against the door, struggling to breathe. Lucy was gone. Grandma found me later that evening. I don't know how long I sat there, but the sun had lowered again when her car pulled into the drive. She didn't call my name or rush from the vehicle. She just stepped out, walked toward me with slow, even steps, and looked at me like something had changed permanently between us. She helped me up and didn't say anything. We drove back to the house without a word. The tires rolled over the dirt with a soft, papery crunch. When she parked, she sat behind the wheel for a long moment, hands resting gently at 10 and 2. Finally, without looking at me, she said, "He saw you, but you lived." Then she opened her door and we went inside. Things were never the same after that. Present day, By the time I found the drawing, I'd already started to worry. Owen had grown quiet. I'd seen him standing at the edge of the yard, whispering to someone I couldn't see. His posture had changed. He no longer twitched or shifted the way children do when they're bored or restless. He held still the way a deer does when it knows something else is watching. Still, part of me had hoped it was just a phase. A 6-year-old's imagination. Something borrowed from a cartoon, or repeated from a story he didn't understand. I hadn't let myself believe it meant anything more. Then I opened his sketchbook. It had been tucked between the pages, half hidden beneath his pillow. He hadn't meant to hide it. He was still too young for secrets. But he'd hesitated when I walked into the room earlier that day, closing the book a little too fast. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Not until later that evening, when the memory of the arch and those hollow eyes came rushing back. The drawing was crude in the way most children's drawings are, but something about the proportions turned my stomach. The figure's legs were too long, stretching nearly to the bottom edge of the paper. Its arms hung well past its waist, ending in dark, knotted fingers. It had no mouth, no nose, just 2 black circles for eyes, scribbled, so hard the paper had nearly torn through. All around it were looping lines coiled into spirals that seemed to pull away from the figure. The next morning I asked him about it over breakfast. "What is it?" I said, tapping the edge of the page. Owen didn't hesitate. "It's the man from the trees," he replied, calm as ever, the one who watches real still. I asked if he'd seen it in a dream, and he shook his head. "No," he said. "Sometimes I see him in the morning, before you wake up." He was unafraid, and said it like he was describing a neighbor. Familiar and expected. That was when he started asking about dogs. Not dogs in general. Lucy, a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. "Can dogs protect you when they're gone?" he asked one night while brushing his teeth. He didn't look at me when he said it. His tone wasn't casual. It carried the kind of weight that comes with a question asked more than once in a child's mind before it's spoken. I crouched beside him and asked, "What made you think of that?" He shrugged, but his answer came without pause. "She sits by the trees sometimes. She doesn't come inside, but she looks at me like she remembers." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure how to. That night, after he'd gone to sleep, I pulled an old storage box from the attic. It was one I hadn't touched since before Owen was born. Inside were newspaper clippings, a few faded Polaroids, and a worn leather collar, with a tarnished brass tag which read, "Lucy," etched in block letters. When I turned it over in my hand, the tag struck the edge of the box and made a sound sharper than I expected. It echoed longer than it should have. I didn't sleep much that night. 2 mornings later, I woke to find Owen already dressed. He stood by the back door with his flashlight in one hand. The other hung loosely at his side. He didn't turn around when I entered the room. "I think you should come with me," he said, his voice unwavering and full of conviction. He sounded like someone ordered to deliver a message they didn't fully understand. I told him to wait, stepped into my shoes, and pulled the camera from the drawer. I didn't know what I expected to see. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a shadow in the trees I could blame on fog or sleep deprivation. But part of me already knew better. The woods behind the house had never felt threatening before. They weren't. Deep, just a narrow belt of pines and underbrush separating our backyard from the old drainage ditch beyond. But that morning they seemed older than the land around them. Something about them struck me as sinister. We walked side by side at first. Then Owen moved ahead, his flashlight swinging in a loose arc. He didn't speak until we reached the line where grass gave way to root-choked dirt. There he stopped. "He doesn't want me," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "He wants you." The words settled between us. It wasn't a warning or a threat. It was a fact. I raised the camera, though my hand had begun to shake. Owen stepped aside just slightly, clearing my view of the narrow corridor between the trees. At first, there was nothing. Then, rapidly, something began to take shape. The trees seemed to shift around it, opening in a way that made space for it as though they were used to its passage. A tall, unnaturally thin figure stood at the center. The same outline I remembered from the desert and from Owen's sketch. It didn't move, but its head tilted just enough to acknowledge the attention. Its eyes, those twin hollows, were fixed on me. They weren't blank. They were focused, and they were ravenous. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I kept the camera, raised, its lens pointed directly at the thing in the trees. But I didn't take a picture. Some instinct told me that doing so wouldn't capture it. It wouldn't expose it. It would only give it a new way in. Instead, I reached for Owen's hand. His fingers curled into mine without hesitation. Together, we slowly stepped back. My gaze never leaving the thing in the woods. It didn't follow. Not physically, at least. Something followed in the silence it left behind, however, haunting us long after we retreated. Something I don't think has ever truly moved on. When we reached the porch, I turned the lock carefully. Each click of the bolt felt final. Owen looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "I don't think he'll come in," he said. "I don't either," I replied, praying I was right, and held my son tight. And we left it at that. The number you have dialed. I hadn't expected the house to be as quiet as it was. You'd think an old farmhouse, even one wired for utilities and insulated in the 70s, would creak or groan or do something to remind you weren't the only one inside it. But the place just sat there. No echoes, no mouse scratches, not even the sighing moan of wind against old glass. Just stillness. That might have been why I started poking around the desk in the corner of the study. My Uncle Malcolm's things had been cleared out by the estate. People, but they'd left the furniture, along with a few weird trinkets that probably weren't worth the gas to haul away. I'd come across a yellow rotary phone earlier in the day, still mounted on the wall in the kitchen like some forgotten relic. It had a tone adapter on the line, oddly enough. Someone had tried to modernize it, maybe 20 years too late. Was on my second beer, still waiting for my internet service to activate and debating whether to start organizing my studio gear when I found it. A small curling post-it note wedged under the felt lining of the desk drawer. On it, written in thin, almost spidery handwriting, were the words, "For help, dial 707-999-0331. No other instructions, no name, no explanation. I took the note to the kitchen and stared at the phone. It was one of those glossy beige models with a long coiled cord and a rotary wheel that clicked when you turned it. I lifted the handset and pressed it to my ear, half expecting it to be dead. But it wasn't. There was a dial tone, warbling and thin. I hesitated, then spun the numbers in. 707-999-0331. The clicks echoed through the line like a skeleton tapping its fingers against glass. Nothing happened at first, just silence. Then the faintest hum, like a cassette tape winding slowly through its reel. After that came music, if you could even call it that. A distorted melody played softly in the background, chimes and violins overlaid with something synthetic and rhythmic, like elevator music from a fever dream. I almost hung up then, assuming I'd dialed into a defunct fax line or some voicemail purgatory. But before I could, the music stopped with an abruptness that made me flinch. A beat later, a voice came on the line. "Welcome to Eidolon Services," it said. "Please state the name you wish removed." The voice was male, but mechanical in its cadence. There was no inflection, no regional accent. It sounded like an executive trying to mimic calm, or an AI trained on customer service manuals. I paused. "What?" "Please state the name you wish removed," it repeated. I assumed it was a prank. Maybe one of those AI-generated phone trees that looped you through nonsense for kicks. But the longer I stood there listening to the deadpan silence that followed, the more a weird sense of obligation settled in. Like I'd been called on to participate in something I hadn't agreed to, but couldn't walk away from either. Jared Marlin, I said. I hadn't thought about that name in years. Jared had been a royal bastard back in school, the kind of kid who looked for bruises to press and secrets to drag into the light. The day he put gum in my headphones and blamed it on a transfer student was the day I stopped trusting anyone in my grade. He probably didn't even remember my name. There was a faint clicking noise on the other end of the line, like a series of keys being tapped in rapid succession. Then the voice returned. Processing removal. Expect results within 24 hours. Thank you for using Eidolon services. The line went dead. No goodbye. No confirmation. Just silence. I let the receiver hang for a moment before returning it to the cradle. The whole thing had lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it left a stale taste in my mouth like metal and dust. I shook it off. Probably some underground art project. Viral marketing for an indie game. Something designed to be creepy and vague, just mysterious enough to stick in your brain. I forgot about it mostly. That night, I microwaved a leftover calzone, watched a low-res horror movie on my laptop, and fell asleep on the pull-out couch, with my phone under my pillow. No dreams, thankfully, just an expanse of static between then and morning. At 11:43 the next day, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I didn't answer right away. It buzzed again, then once more after that. On the third try I picked up, more annoyed than anything, yeah? There was a brief delay, and then I heard it, the same warped hold music from the night before. It scraped at my ears like something trying too hard to be soft. Then it stopped, and a voice came on. Not the same one as before. This one was female. Smoother, but just as emotionless. Courtesy recording for client Ryan Martini, it said. Removal confirmation in progress. Please remain on the line. I blinked, unsure whether I'd heard that right. What the hell is this? I asked. Instead of a reply, the line filled with noise. Not static, not music. A human voice. Please, please, don't do this. It was distant, as though being filtered through a tunnel. Then louder, more distinct. I didn't do anything to you. Please. Don't let them. It was Jared. I didn't recognize it at first, but once I did, something in my stomach turned over. He was crying. His voice cracked with desperation. There was a sound like scraping metal, followed by a wet, choking gasp. Then silence. A different voice came on the line. Male. Formal. Removal confirmed, it said. We appreciate your participation, Mr. Martini. 1 credit has been applied to your account. Then, as if it were a normal call from a bank or an insurance company, the voice added, Have a productive day. The call ended. I stood there for a long moment, my phone still pressed to my ear, even though the screen had gone black. Something was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. I stared at the rotary phone on the wall. My uncle had never married, never had kids. The neighbor said he kept to himself. I wondered if he had made a call like I had. I should have thrown the handset through the window and left the house behind. I should have buried the number in the backyard and never spoken it aloud again. Instead, I walked back to the kitchen, lifted the receiver from the rotary phone and dialed the number a second time. 707-999-0331. This time there was no music. No delay. The line picked up instantly. Welcome back, Mr. Martini. The same voice from the courtesy call said. Removal confirmed. 1 credit has been applied. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words tangled on the way out. There were too many questions fighting to be first. I swallowed once, twice, and settled on the only one that seemed to matter. What's a credit good for? There was a pause, just long enough to make me think the line had gone dead again. But the voice returned, calm and clear as ever. Credits may be exchanged for additional services through Eidolon. Insertion, removal, restructuring, and memory compensation are available, subject to account status. I stared at the receiver in my hand, unsure if I had just signed up for a loyalty program from hell or stepped sideways into another dimension. I don't understand, I said, my voice low and hoarse. That is common, the voice replied. Your account has been activated. Additional assistance is available at your request. Do you wish to hear your current options? I didn't answer right away. In the corner of the kitchen, I saw one of my moving boxes, still half full, marked Studio Junk in permanent marker. Atop it was the microphone I'd used for years, the one that had followed me from city to city, job to job, the one I'd used to record a dozen podcast intros and interviews. It sat there like an artifact from another life. A simpler one. Do you Silence stretched between us, but the line didn't hang up. Outside, the wind shifted. I heard dry leaves scatter against the porch. I should hang up, I whispered. But I didn't. The day after the courtesy call, I couldn't stop thinking about the voice on the other end of the line. It hadn't just confirmed what I'd heard before. It had laid the groundwork for something bigger, something that reached far beyond a single act of removal. They'd use the word account. They'd apply to credit. Those were terms that belonged to systems, structured ones, financial, bureaucratic, legal. This wasn't some rogue supernatural prank or a freak glitch in reality. It was something designed. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, listening to the wind brush dry pine needles against the window frame. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I got up, walked to the rotary phone, and dialed the number again. This time the voice was waiting. "Welcome back, Mr. Martini. You currently have 1 credit available." I stood barefoot on the cold tile, floor of the handset pressed to my ear. I remembered what it had said before, that credits could be exchanged for services. But I hadn't asked then what that really meant. Now I wanted specifics. "All right," I said. "You told me I had a credit. What can I use it for exactly?" Current service categories include erasure, insertion, swap, and restructure. Detailed descriptions available upon request. Please indicate which category you would like to explore. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to know what any of those words truly meant, but something about insertion caught in my mind, like a puzzle piece half visible beneath the dust. I asked for details. Insertion, the voice explained, places a new individual, opportunity, or entity into your life. This insertion will conform to your contextual needs based on psychological profile and situational data. Results may include, but are not limited to, romantic partners, professional contacts, material gains, or social connections. My lips were dry. I wet them with the edge of my tongue and said, "Okay, 1 insertion." There was no ceremony, no dramatic flourish, just a soft tone like the end of a transaction at a self-checkout kiosk. "Insertion confirmed," the voice said. "Processing. Please allow up to 24 hours for placement. Thank you for using Eidolon services." The line went dead. I hung up and stood there in the kitchen for a long time, the phone cord swaying slightly from the movement. I didn't know what I expected, maybe a doorbell or an immediate change in the room around me. But nothing happened. Spent the morning cleaning up the garage, trying to keep my hands busy. Around noon, I checked my email and saw a new message from an agency I didn't recognize, Obsidian Audio Collective. The subject line read, "Podcast Partnership Inquiry. High-tier freelance opportunity." I opened it. The message was short and professional. They had reviewed my public portfolio, admired my editing and sound design, and were offering me a contract position to assist with their newest serialized true crime show. Compensation was generous. The timeline was flexible. I didn't remember submitting anything to them. In fact, I had taken my portfolio offline 2 weeks ago when I moved. I scrolled to the bottom of the message looking for a catch. There wasn't one. Just a digital signature and a link to a secure file-sharing platform for project materials. I clicked it. Inside was a full set of scripts, interview audio, and raw B-roll, all tagged and organized. The kind of prep work I only saw on premium commercial projects. The insertion had worked. For the rest of that week, I immersed myself in the new contract. I edited files, submitted drafts, and received prompt, glowing feedback. The money hit my account in 2 payments, early. Every time I heard the name Obsidian Audio Collective, I felt a jolt of unease. They had no LinkedIn page, no social media, presence. The people I emailed didn't exist anywhere else online, but I didn't stop. 3 days later, I picked up the rotary phone again. "Welcome back, Mr. Martini. You have 0 available credits. Would you like to acquire more?" I didn't respond right away. The voice waited. "I want to remove someone," I said. "Please state the name." "Thomas Bell," I said. "He was a client. Ghosted me on a $700 invoice 2 months ago." The voice processed the name. I didn't even wait for the confirmation this time. I hung up. The next day, I searched his social profiles. His account was gone. His company's site redirected to a 404 error. The shared folder he'd sent me the raw files through no longer existed in my drive. Even the email thread was gone. The removal was absolute. 2 days later, I called again. This time, I named the neighbor's dog. The dog stopped barking that night. I started to lose track of when I had last made a call. Sometimes I'd wake up thinking about names, or catch myself writing one down while I stirred my coffee. At first, I thought I was still operating under a normal rhythm, like I was managing a to-do list, but then I started noticing the gaps. One afternoon, while organizing photos on my phone, I came across a picture I didn't remember taking. It showed me and a woman seated on the porch steps, smiling at each other. She had shoulder-length auburn hair and was wearing a thin cardigan and jeans. Her hand was on my knee. The sun behind us painted the whole image in gold. I stared at it for almost a full minute before checking the metadata. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. There was no name saved to her contact file. Just L. When I backed out of the photo app, I noticed something else. My phone's wallpaper had changed. It used to be a forest trail I hiked once with my uncle. Now it was a close-up shot of that same woman's face laughing in mid-motion. I scrolled through my messages and found a thread titled Lena Vaughn. The chat history stretched back 2 weeks. There were inside jokes, pictures of takeout, a voice memo of her singing softly off-key. I listened to it 3 times. I didn't remember her voice. But the more I read, the more my brain tried to convince me I did. By the time the week ended, I had forgotten how many people I had called in about. Names swirled through my mind like oil on water. Some slipped through my fingers. Others stuck. On the 7th night, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling again when I heard it. The music. It wasn't coming from the phone. It was seeping through the walls, distant, distorted, and barely audible. The same eerie blend of violins and synthetic chimes I'd heard the first time I called. I rose from bed slowly and followed the sound. It led me to the back hallway. The wallpaper there was beginning to peel, revealing faint symbols etched into the plaster beneath. Concentric loops, numbers, and what looked like tally marks. I pressed my ear to the wall. The music continued, looping again and again until it faded away. I returned to bed, but I didn't sleep. The following morning began like any other, though I noticed the shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch a little farther than usual, like the sun had shifted its position behind the trees without asking permission. I didn't take it as an omen at first. I chalked it up to my sleep-deprived brain and the paranoia that had crept in since the music in the walls. But when the phone rang at 7:14 a.m., a time when I never received calls, not even spam, I knew something was wrong. The display on my phone showed no number. Just a blank screen and a single word, private. I answered it without speaking. A new voice greeted me. It wasn't the same one I'd come to expect. The calm, corporate tone with its detached inflections. This one was softer, still professional, but more clinical than conversational. "Mr. Martini," the voice said. "This is Operator 7. You are being contacted in regard to an internal audit." I didn't respond. The voice continued. "Our system has flagged your account for unauthorized overuse of services. You have exceeded your approved engagement threshold for a Class 1 probationary member." The words dropped into my chest like weights. I turned away from the window and sat down at the edge of the bed. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," the voice replied, "that your activity has triggered a compliance review. You are now within the restructuring window, pending remediation. To avoid automatic compliance restructuring, you are required to refer 5 eligible individuals within 72 hours. The words had the cadence of a legal disclaimer, but they landed with finality. My mouth felt dry. What happens if I don't? There was a pause on the line, as though the operator were considering how much to say. When the voice returned, it was slightly lower in tone. If remediation is not achieved within the allotted time frame, your file will be subject to non-consensual restructuring. You will be permanently removed from primary identity alignment. I don't know what the hell that means. You will no longer be you, the voice said, not as you understand it. I stood and began to pace, the floorboards groaning under my bare feet. And these referrals, what happens to the people I give you? That depends on their compatibility with our service, the voice answered. Most are offered introductory access. Some elect to proceed. Others are deemed incompatible and processed accordingly. I didn't ask what processed accordingly meant. I had a feeling I already knew. We have couriered a referral packet to your residence, the voice continued. It should arrive today, contained within our 5 access tokens. Each must be distributed to a separate subject with an initial contact timestamp recorded. You will receive notification for each completed engagement. I pressed my hand to my face, trying to steady my thoughts. And if I do this? If I find 5 people? Your compliance status will be reset. Your restructuring appointment will be suspended pending future review. And if I refuse? You are already within the ledger, Mr. Martini. Refusal is not a valid input. The call ended before I could respond. The line cut off with no tone and no confirmation. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for it to blink back to life. It didn't. The package arrived by noon. A man in a black polo shirt and dark sunglasses left it on the front porch without ringing the bell. By the time I opened the door, he was already back in the van, which bore no logo or license plate. The moment the wheels touched the road, the van was gone, faster than seemed possible. The packet was black and square, about the size of a hardcover book. Inside were 5 matte black business cards. Each was embossed with a silver symbol that resembled an eye partially eclipsed by a crescent blade. There was no name, no address, only a number printed in sharp, minimalist font across the center. 707-999-0331. I held the cards in my hands, feeling their strange texture, smoother than paper, rougher than plastic. My name was written on the inside flap of the box in clean white lettering. Referral Authority, Ryan Martini. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the cards like they might rewrite themselves if I waited long enough. But nothing changed. The next morning, I placed the first card in my coat pocket and walked down to the cafe near the edge of town. The place wasn't busy, just a few people working on laptops or murmuring over half-eaten pastries. Behind the counter stood a young woman I recognized from previous visits. She always wore a red scarf and black stud earrings shaped like moons. Her name tag read Samira, but she went by Sam. When I handed her the card, I told her it was something for a podcast she might find interesting. She smiled politely and thanked me before sliding it under the register. Referral 1. The second card went to a man on a podcasting forum I frequented. His screen name was Deep Cut Z, and he often posted questions about gear and voice processing. I messaged him, told him I had something off the beaten path. We agreed to a private chat. I gave him the number and watched as the message was marked, Read Referral 2. The third went to my neighbor, the one with the cracked satellite dish and the rusty smoker on his back porch. We'd exchanged nods but never words. I pretended to be organizing a neighborhood project. He didn't seem particularly interested but took the card anyway. Referral 3. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the other 2 cards tucked in a drawer beside my bed, but I kept dreaming they were in my mouth, sharp-edged and metallic, pressing against the backs of my teeth. I woke up gasping, though I knew better than to say the dream had felt real. It hadn't. It had just felt inevitable. The next day, I received a call at 6:02 a.m. Referral 1 completed, the voice said. Referral 2 pending. Referral 3 non-viable. I sat on the edge of the tub with the phone pressed to my ear, my reflection fractured in the mirror across from me. What happened to Referral 3? I asked. Incompatible, the voice replied. Subject underwent terminal rejection. You mean he died? The voice didn't confirm. It simply waited for another question. I swallowed hard. What about referral 1? Currently undergoing integration. Status unstable. What does that mean? Subject remains under observation. If integration fails, secondary processing will be initiated. The call ended. I spent the rest of the morning glued to news alerts. Around noon, I came across a local report about an unresponsive woman found behind the counter of a cafe. Her name withheld pending investigation. I didn't need them to tell me it was Sam. Referral 2 messaged me late that night. Dude, what the hell is this thing? I called, and now I can't sleep. I feel like someone's watching me. If this is a joke, it's not funny. I never responded. The message marked me as active. The site flagged me for online presence, which I hadn't authorized. I unplugged my modem after that. The next evening, I called the number from the rotary phone. You said I needed 5 referrals, I said. I gave you 3. Only 1 remains viable, the voice responded. Remaining quota 4. Time remaining, 26 hours. This is impossible, I said. I did what you asked. You are within the ledger, Mr. Martini. It is no longer a matter of consent. I want out. There is no out. The line went silent for a moment, and I thought the call had ended. But the voice returned, low and firm. You are woven into the ledger. You are part of the system. Your actions are recorded. Your debts are assigned. You may delay compliance, but you may not erase obligation. I stood in the dark, the phone cord twisted in my hand, listening to the dial tone as it returned. Didn't make any more calls that night. The next morning, I left the house for the first time in 3 days. The air outside was brittle and cool, the early frost still clinging to the edges of fallen leaves that crunched under my boots. I walked into town with the intention of clearing my head, but the streets felt unfamiliar, as if the buildings had shifted ever so slightly in the night. A coffee shop stood where a hardware store had been a week ago. A mural on the side of a post office now depicted a scene I was sure had never existed before. 2 children sharing an apple beneath a sky split by concentric rings of light. I wandered through the local square and noticed a man standing perfectly still by the public fountain. He wore a gray overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face, but something about him rang a distant bell. I couldn't place the memory, though. I passed him slowly, expecting him to move or shift, but he didn't even blink. Only after I turned the corner did I dare glance back. He was gone. By the time I made it home, the world felt distorted, like an out-of-sync audio track sliding just behind the video. I didn't feel feverish, but the house no longer welcomed me in the way it had before. The shadows didn't wait until sunset anymore. They pooled early in the corners of the kitchen. The hold music, thin, wavering, stitched with that strange synthetic harmony, now whispered just below the range of hearing, whether I was near the phone or not. I stopped checking the time. I started checking the mirror. I'd see movement behind me sometimes, reflections of people I didn't recognize. One of them was a teenage boy with bruises up and down his arms. Another was an elderly woman with her mouth sewn shut. They never appeared in the room itself, only in glass, only when I wasn't paying attention. Then there was Lena. At first, I told myself she was a fabrication, something the system had stitched into my memory to reward compliance. But the way she looked at me with that particular slant of the brow and the gentle pause she left before laughing, those things didn't feel artificial. They felt familiar. They felt real. She came by that evening with Chinese takeout and 2 beers. We sat on the couch together, her legs curled beneath her, and watched an old thriller on my laptop. She leaned into my shoulder the way someone would if they'd done it before. And yet, each time I closed my eyes, I couldn't picture the first day we met. I couldn't remember introducing her to anyone, couldn't recall a single photo I'd taken with her, only of her. When she went to the bathroom, I opened my phone. The message history with her still stretched back weeks. Dozens of conversations, all full of inside jokes and shared references. But every time I read one, a hollow sensation spread behind my ribs, like my brain was flipping through pages I hadn't written. My phone buzzed. A new call came in from a restricted number. I answered, without thinking. "Mr. Martini," said a voice I recognized. It wasn't Operator 7 nor the calm male voice from before. This one was more personal, familiar. I realized with a chill that it sounded like me. Not exactly, but close enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. "You have exceeded the acceptable window for restructuring compliance," the voice continued. "Your credit balance remains at 0. You are now within the mandatory restructuring threshold." I stood, pacing toward the far side of the room. "You said I could defer restructuring by referring others. You failed to meet your quota." "I gave you 3, I snapped. One of them worked." "Yes," the voice said calmly. "One was compatible, 2 were processed. Total credits earned, 1. Total balance remaining, 0. Restructure, pending." "What does that mean?" I asked. "What are you going to do to me?" There was a pause, as though the voice were parsing through something behind the curtain. "Standard restructuring removes identity persistence, behavioral. Continuity is recycled. Personal origin and psychological profile are rewritten according to system demand." "That's not an answer," I said. "You're just stringing words together." "You will no longer exist as yourself," the voice clarified. "You will continue, but not as Ryan Martini." My chest felt tight, but not with panic. The fear had passed days ago. This was something different, like the air was being compressed around me. "Can I stop it?" I asked. "You may delay restructure by voluntary sacrifice," the voice said. "One offering must be submitted. Subject must be known to you. Relationship must carry emotional significance." The answer arrived as quickly as the words were finished. I didn't need to think about it. "Lena," I said. The voice acknowledged the name with a brief metallic tone. Full name, Lena Vaughn. Classification, inserted partner. System compatibility verified. "Will this give me another credit?" "No," the voice said. "It will reset your restructure clock by 72 hours. No further extensions will be offered." "I understand," I replied. "Confirm submission?" I hesitated. I looked toward the hallway where Lena's coat hung on the rack and her purse sat on the floor beneath it. I thought about her laugh, the way her lips curled when she pretended to be mad at me. But I also remembered that none of those things had happened before 2 weeks ago. "Confirm," I said. "Submission accepted. Final synchronization in progress. Estimated resolution, 3 minutes. Please do not attempt to interfere." The line went dead. I returned to the living room. Lena never came out of the bathroom. I waited for 20 minutes before I finally knocked. When I opened the door, the room was empty. Her jacket was gone from the rack, her purse had vanished, my phone no longer had any messages from her. The contact name was missing. The photos I had looked at just hours before were no longer in the gallery. Her toothbrush was gone from the sink. Her hair was gone from the shower drain. And yet I remembered her, not just as an inserted stranger, but as someone who had become part of my life's rhythm. I knew how she laughed, what she liked on her dumplings, which section of the couch she always claimed. Now that she was gone, something in me felt altered. I walked back to the kitchen trying to find something grounding, something that still felt tethered to reality. I reached for a glass but missed it by inches, my fingers gripping nothing. I stared at my hand. It didn't feel unfamiliar, but something about its movement seemed delayed, like I was watching it through a frame buffer. Then the pain started. It wasn't sharp or sudden. It began as a pressure in the center of my chest, slowly expanding, until it reached my shoulders, my spine, the back of my eyes. I fell to my knees and clutched my ribs, not because it hurt, but because I felt like I had lost something crucial, like a nerve had been severed, or a cord inside me had been plucked, and then cut. There was no blood, no trembling. But when I finally stood up and looked around the house, I realized I no longer remembered what it had looked like when I first arrived. I didn't remember where I had placed my boxes, or which shelf held my books, or whether the windows always faced east. I didn't remember the name of my mother's favorite song, I didn't remember the last words my uncle had said before he died. I didn't remember how old I had been when I first moved out on my own. I only remembered a phone number, and that someone named Lena had once loved me, even if she had never existed at all. The next morning, I tried to burn the card. I lit it with a match over the sink, watching as the black surface curled and hissed at the flame. The silver eye, with its crescent blade pupil, melted down into bubbling plastic before disintegrating entirely into a soft gray ash that scattered down the drain. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt like I'd just buried something that was still breathing. Then I opened my phone and checked my recent calls. The number was still there. 70331. I deleted it again, this time from my contacts and from the system call log. I even factory reset the phone and reloaded only the bare minimum apps I needed to function. For a few hours, I believed it had worked. That night, I woke up in the hallway outside my bedroom. The phone was in my hand. The screen was lit. The call had just ended. Duration, 12 minutes, 42 seconds. Contact, private. I didn't remember making the call. I didn't remember dreaming. But the hold music was still playing, faint, distant, impossible to locate, yet undeniably present. I started keeping a log. I began locking my phone in the toolbox out in the garage, placing the key beneath a floorboard in the living room. Every morning, the phone was back on the charger. The toolbox was untouched. The key was still where I had left it. On the 5th night, I fell asleep on the couch with the television playing static. When I opened my eyes, it was morning, and I was seated at my uncle's old desk in the study. The rotary phone sat in its cradle, perfectly still, its long coiled cord resting in the exact position I remembered from the day I moved in. It rang once. I reached for it without thinking. The motion fluid and automatic, like turning off an alarm I had heard 1,000 times. The sound was softer, now deeper, as if the pitch had been adjusted to meet my own internal rhythm. I held the receiver to my ear. The line clicked. Then a voice, calm and composed, said, "Welcome to Eidolon Services. This is Operator Marteni. Whose reality would you like to alter today?" The words hadn't come from the other end of the line. They had come from me. The room was silent. The receiver was cold in my hand. "Sir?" came a voice. A real one this time, from somewhere far away, high-pitched, uncertain, young. Is this where I can make a removal?" I tried to answer. I wanted to tell him to hang up. I wanted to scream at him to burn the number and never look back. But instead, my voice obeyed the script. "Please, provide the name you wish removed." He hesitated. I recognized his silence. Then he said a name, one I had never heard before. A woman. His voice trembled when he spoke it. I felt the signal pass through me like a current or a signal routed through an unseen switchboard. I knew the process was already beginning. "Removal confirmed," I said. "Expect results within 24 hours." The call ended. I stared down at my hands. They looked the same, but they no longer felt like mine. I opened the desk drawer. Inside was a fresh pack of cards, matte black with the same silver emblem. There were 5 of them, and now they bore my name. Referral Authority, Ryan Marteni. You've read this far, which means you know I've told you the truth. Or at least the truth as I understand it. There are still parts I don't remember. Names, details, fragments of places and conversations that feel like they belonged to someone else. Maybe they did. Maybe I've been rewritten so many times that only the core structure remains. I wish I could tell you not to worry. I wish I could say there's a way out. But the truth is, by the time you finish this, you're already in the ledger. You're not a reader anymore. You're a witness. And witnesses leave impressions. Impressions get recorded. And records. Become assignments. I can't ask for your help. It's too late for that. But I can ask you something else. Do you remember the last time your phone rang and no one was there? The next time it happens, don't answer. Because if you do, I'll be waiting.